Welcome to Teams Tuesday, a podcast about mastering the best about what other people have already figured out. Teams Tuesday focuses on insights and lessons that never expire. You will walk away from every episode with actionable insights that help you get better results and be more productive.
This was about as bizarre and easy as it gets.
The client just couldn't make up their mind.
I feel like we had top.
Went from a project of 20 weeks to just 2.
The DevOps was a cultural shift.
This is Teams Tuesday with your host, Peter Ward.
Welcome to Teams Tuesday. It's February 2024. I'm your host, Peter Ward from New York City. We had a little bit of snow over the weekend, a little bit of snow last week. We have a great guest on the show today who's actually going to talk about security, which almost every one of our M365 clients actually asked us about this, particularly with phishing and AD. Eric Wardrobe, how are you?
Good. How are you doing, Peter?
Not too bad, not too bad. You're upstate New York a bit, so I'm assuming you get a little bit more snow than me, actually.
Yeah, it's about the same though. I was just down in the city this weekend. It's atypical, the little bit of snow we've had this year, but usually more. So
Really? Okay. We've only had 2 snow sessions, 2 snow days this year, pretty for the last 2 years, actually. I don't know if that's the same where you are. I know you're in Schenectady, upstate New York.
yeah.
Okay. So I know your hobbies are, you're a bit of an outdoorsy type person with your kayaking, hiking, snowboarding. Okay. And you have a few tattoos. Is there any stories behind these tattoos?
I would say that, I have some nerd tattoos. I have the Master Sword. So if you like Legend of Zelda, I don't know if there's anything maybe super interesting about anyone in particular, but would say I'm certainly addicted to it. Like I got the first couple, and then it's just kind of like wanting more and more, and I have plans, and yeah.
It just goes up the arm, across the chest, down the, it just down on the knees and legs and like that. Okay. All right. Very, very cool on that front. Okay. So let's just talk about your first job when you left school. You were in the .com boom, actually. So tell me, were you working some .com startup, I'm assuming?
Yeah, so it was, late 90s. So all the ISPs were sort of combining, and it was a Northeast conglomerate of different ISPs, did some web hosting, a lot of dial-up, all that stuff, some DSL. Right. And then, like most of those companies, the money ran out and they all went out of business.
Dial up. Okay. That's a blast in the past. I remember, I think I had Net Zero. That was my ISP. And then it went on to, and then AOL on that front. Okay. So that was that. And so you got introduced to SharePoint 2010, and you were actually working for Microsoft. Is that when you got experience with the Windows Server team?
So in 2010, I was actually working for the state of New York for the court system. And I managed the Windows server team that we had. And it was a shop where if it was a Microsoft product, it was the Windows team's problem. We had to manage a couple SharePoint farms, but a lot of the dev work, luckily, we kind of pushed off onto not us. So.
All right. Okay. So basically, you were like one of the SharePoint admin, 2010.
Yeah.
So SharePoint, like when the developer came up to you and said, I want to deploy a WSP into the GAC, you had sort of like a little bit of a nervous tweak on that one, did you?
Yep. But luckily, managing, you can delegate. So
it's someone else's responsibility. So therefore, when the WSP gets deployed and the central admin disappears for those 3 seconds, which seems like a lifetime, those were the days. All right. No, I get that totally on that. So tell me about your current job. What do you do? I know you're an MVP.
Yep. So security MVP awarded last year. Currently work for company Sempris. We work in the Active Directory and Entra ID security space. So identity threat detection response, Active Directory, Forest, cyber recovery, a lot of different things. But
so you're really focused on protection of the AD and the identity. That's really that's your solution. That I'm assuming, isn't it?
Yeah. And these days I've always sort of been like an identity guy, but identity didn't really matter, right? You needed Active Directory for things to run. And now, like a lot of marketing is, right, identity is the new security perimeter, but I actually think it holds water, right? You look at, M365, everything runs through conditional access in one way or another, right? And it's all identity driven. So,
Well, now that's when you talk about that. Obviously, the challenge you've got with a lot of organizations that AD is on-prem, yet they're working everything in the cloud. Is that a potential risk?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of potential risks. A lot of them ultimately relate with how the organization is sort of structured, how they secure themselves, or unfortunately don't. There's a lot of ways you can move from Active Directory into Entra and M365. There's some ways you can move from Azure back into AD. So yeah, there is a lot of risk that sort of comes from that hybrid identity scenario that a lot of enterprises have. So.
Okay, and so you're now security MVP. So with that being like said, like Copilot, are you looking at does Copilot affect security in any capacity?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like it's going to, right? There's security Copilot. I have not had a huge chance to delve into all the bits and bobs of security Copilot. Saw some of the demos at Ignite. I think it looks like it has a good application in helping describe things that are happening in security, right? And if you're not a security person, or even if you are, it might be difficult to understand like what this alert means or things like that. So I definitely see potential in it.
Because you said that you're a little bit neutral about AI and all your interactions being lukewarm. What do you mean by that?
Well, I'll say that, I've asked AI, I'll say like ChatGPT, to do things like maybe write a PowerShell script. I've had some things where I've asked it questions about, M365 admin stuff or security things, and it misses the mark. I'd say more, it misses the mark enough where I would not feel confident in just sort of letting it go off and do its thing without having a lot of human vetting of what it's generating to say whether or not this is actually accurate. And I think the lukewarm feeling, I'll just say, is at that point, if you have to have humans that are already experts in the thing saying, yep, it's good, or no, it's bad, then why not just have the humans sort of doing that work anyways?
Right. Okay. And you started to talk about like you're curious to see E7 licensing come out. I'm about to say like I didn't realize you went up that far. Actually, is this?
Oh, that's just sarcasm on my part. Yeah, right. I mean, it's I think with copilots and a lot of the other stuff, it can feel tough, right? Because E5 was supposed to be the thing that gets you everything. So yeah.
I know you have these like MVP jokes going around, but yeah, okay. E5 was like that's what I thought. I think I didn't realize there's an E6, and you're saying there's an E7. What is going on here? Okay. Admittedly, with all the security and all the other stuff, this is where the licensing costs do actually begin to add up quite a bit. Actually. Yeah. Okay, but again, if you're a regulated company, your bank, you've got to battle hard on your security. There's no ifs, buts. And you're going to be spending a lot on it, else you're going to be closed down.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's the small, medium business sector that gets hit hard because, right, like they may be targets, or even small, municipalities like towns and cities. Maybe they can't afford E5, P2 type licensing. But you see these days, if you follow any security news, that pretty much anyone's a target. Like they don't discriminate in who they go after. So
also there's been cases where, like, not recently but in previous years, you sort of had I think it might have been about 3 or 4 years ago, some hospital trusts were hit and they were using they had all their PCs were XP, yep. So someone's like, what are you guys doing here? Okay, I'm on that. And so at the end of the day, it's not just buying the security and configuring it all. You've got to have the whole technology stack updated, latest, greatest patches on that. And yes, it's working. Even though it's working, you can't just leave it alone.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's the work that people in like healthcare have to put in to try to keep everything running all the time and also keep everything up to date. So I feel for them for how tough it can be. But
Well, that as well, but you also, the other thing as well is that you've got so much inventory of PCs. Like we've got some clients, they've got more VMs than employees.
Yeah.
Okay, because you've got development servers, backup servers, you've got people on maternity leave, people in the office, they've got VM at home, they've got this VM, developers might have 3 or 4 VMs, testing, dev, and everything else. It just gets it gets really, really crazy. All right, we could talk for another 10, 15 minutes, if not an hour on this actually, but you do actually have a demo actually. So this is your time to shine. So
all right.
On that. So what are the cool features of the demo going to be?
So we're actually going to be talking about phishing-resistant authentication in Entra ID. And so the demo is probably a bit different than other demos because it's the demonstration here. If I can get my new Teams to share my screen out. Lovely, everything's working. The demonstration is actually really wanting to focus on how easy it is for the attackers, the threat actors to steal credentials, right, from any organization through phishing. There's software out there these days that makes it real easy to sort of just do this stuff. You don't need to be a sophisticated attacker. And I think from a business perspective, though, right, this leads into business email compromise. So just kind of want to set the stage here, right? And so when we talk about business email compromise, right, this is someone essentially falling for a phishing email, right? And so Microsoft statistics alone in April 2022 through April 2023, 35 million BEC attempts, right, which comes down to 156,000 daily attempts. And Microsoft also, through their Mystic, right, and their other teams that sort of work with the government to take down, the bad actors out there. I mean, you see these numbers, they took down close to 500,000 phishing URLs, right? So if you think of the sheer volume, right, 500,000 sites set up to phish people that in a year they took down, and that's only a fraction of all the sites that even would exist out there for phishing. So
okay, so let me okay, so I can get any organization, I can get thousands of emails off ZoomInfo. Okay, I can be using email blasting tools like SendGun or SendGrid constantly to blast out, and then with the links and the URLs, is that kind of like I'm no expert on phishing. Is this is this their tools of choice?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting, and I actually have I had a chance to walk through a scenario because I wanted to really follow the flow of like a phishing attack. And so if you kind of go through this example here that I actually have showing, right, the user receives an email that they're getting phished, and this URL that they have, this doubleclick.net URL that is in that email, it actually goes to Google Marketing Platform, right? And so the end user doesn't know it's necessarily bad. A mail defense system, right, like Exchange Online Protection or whatever it might be called now, or a third party, right, may say, hey, that's fine. And right, we add more sophistication where we're like, well, let's inspect this URL, right? But the threat actor is kind of always a step ahead, because in this example scenario, that actually redirected to a different domain that I just have in here as domain A, and trying to interfere with mail systems. They were actually using Cloudflare, and they're using a mechanism within it to put up a CAPTCHA in front of it to try to stop a mail system from analyzing that URL. And at the same time, people associate CAPTCHAs with like stronger proofing, right? Because usually it's like if you have to do a CAPTCHA, you're proving you are a human. And it also kind of then plays with the human psyche where they're like, well, this must be valid if I'm getting hit with a CAPTCHA. Then they also sort of cycle through basically 302 redirects, just so in a HTML page, just saying redirect to this other domain, because they're trying to exhaust, again, some mail defense systems will only follow so many URLs before they kind of like will give up on trying to track down what they're doing.
Right.
And then they host this stuff in like something like DigitalOcean, not trying to pick on DigitalOcean, but just like they'll use a US cloud provider to host the domain that actually has that malicious proxy server that is actually the thing performing the phishing. And then they actually pass, if this thing here is our, let me get my pen out, right? If this is like our access tokens for Exchange Online, that actually then gets passed on to a different server that then ends up replaying that stuff to Exchange. So it's a very long string from sort of start to finish. Yeah, if you were to like go follow a common sort of modern phishing attack, once you get the person to click on the link, this is kind of what that flow will typically look like in the US.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was actually this sophisticated, like in terms of the forwarding. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I know when your emails come in, oh yeah, this link is safe. Okay, because of course it's going to doubleclick.net, but then it's obviously redirecting to some rogue
Yeah.
site. Right,
Yeah.
clever stuff.
Yeah. But I'll just say on this, you know, it also gets interesting because now, right, Microsoft's really done actually a lot of work to enhance, you know, the mail protection within M365 to defend against this stuff. But, you know, now there's smishing and things, right? You'll get a text message with a link and stuff like that. So, right, they're always trying to find ways to evade mail. There's QR code phishing, right, where people can scan a QR code, but the mail protection system might not know what that QR code is. And now Microsoft, I think, is working on adding that stuff in M365 as well, right? But it's just always playing catch up with the bad guys.
So I click on a link. My PC is locked down. Okay, I click on the link. What's you know, if it downloads an exe, it won't install because I don't have access to install stuff. So what are the other thing when you click on links? What else can you be doing?
So honestly, the in these scenarios, it's not so much like we're not trying to install malware on your PC. It's really trying to get this access token. And so I can actually show a picture here with different diagram, right? So when you're phished, you have this server in the middle, right? And this thing really isn't interested in attacking you. It's almost always interested in getting into your email. So especially if you work in finance or sales or anything that might have to do with financial transactions with your business, they can be a huge target for phishing because if the threat actor wants to get into your, say you're the CFO, they get into your inbox and they watch your mail patterns for a while. And then eventually they might email one of your assistants and say, I authorize like this, you know, wire transfer to this bank, and the assistant will just go do it. Right. And that is really why the threat actor wants to be in there. And I've seen firsthand where they've emailed customers of someone and they've been like, oh, our routing number has changed and our account number for like where you send your deposits to. And as well as those CFO scenarios, I was working with university implementing MFA because they had their CFO phished and that scenario happened. They lost about $500,000 that was sent off to some foreign bank because a assistant to CFO got this email saying, do this thing. They're like, hey, it's a legitimate email, right, from what they can tell. So it's really getting into Exchange Online is like kind of the target vector. It's not like giving you malware.
You probably know the story. Was it someone like the assistant to the Secretary of Defense? China had access to their inbox for 3 months. Have you heard that story?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot of, well, there's been a lot going on, especially recently with all the news, right, about some of the Microsoft breaches, which, you know, I suppose I've been following a lot of the conversations around how the attack took place. But yeah, there's been some pretty bad breaches, right? And the thing is for most end users, right, like where security isn't your day job, if someone is just in your mailbox, just looking at what you do, right, like, how would you know, right? They're not sending email maybe until they eventually would want to. If they're just watching email come in and out, right, they can really gather a lot of interesting data still about you. And yeah, to like your point, right, you could still capture data out of there without necessarily having to like, you know, forward emails and things like that, right? If I'm in there reading your inbox, so.
Right. Yeah, no, I hear on that.
So, yeah, and I think with the sort of demonstration that I'll have up in a second, I just wanted to kind of walk through, right, like these systems that we see out there, these malicious proxy servers, right, that get deployed. And this is the thing that is where you end up landing, right? So you go through all those redirects and then you hit that server that is actually capturing effectively all your credentials, right? And so when you get that phish, right, you open that link that goes to that phishing site that's hosted, again, maybe in DigitalOcean or AWS or even Azure, right? And the user has no idea that they are being phished, right? They might look at the URL, but again, right, a lot of end users may also not, or they may believe, right, that it's legitimate enough depending on the type of URL. And this is just literally the request is just forwarded onto, in this case, Entra ID, right? The user is going to be prompted to perform MFA, and it's just forwarded on, from Entra ID through that proxy server to our end user. We input our MFA response, right? So we use our SMS text or open the Authenticator app. We put the code into that malicious proxy server, and it forwards it back on to Entra, right? And this is where, like in that other diagram, right, Entra essentially is returning tokens, right? You get your refresh token and your access token, the things that, like the access token you give to Exchange Online saying, right, hey, I authenticated, here's my access token, let me read my email. Well, they've also got a copy of that, and they might forward on the access token to you. But in the meantime, that threat actor also basically has all your tokens necessary to impersonate you. And
when you said tokens, do you just want to talk about that?
Yeah, so with authentication and modern authentication, so Entra and Microsoft 365, they're all based on OpenID Connect, pretty much the de facto standard for authentication on the web these days for pretty much anything. So this token is a thing that sort of is what's used to, you give it to like Exchange Online, right? And you're like, I'm Peter, right? And this is my proof that I have authenticated Entra ID, and this says I'm Peter, so let me into Peter's mailbox. And Exchange will accept it from you, and then depending on, I won't get into the weeds, but depending on how things are set up, it will then go say, hey, Entra, right? Like this thing says Peter's trying to get into Exchange, and there's a way that they can sort of like say, yep, like because there's signing involved and all this. Entra will be like, yeah, that looks like something I just gave Peter to let him into Exchange, so let him on in. And so Exchange is like, here's your email. And there's lots of different sort of types of tokens at play, and it could get very boring and deep quickly if we got into all the different types. But yeah, that is essentially the thing that represents you to the service. So I'm using Exchange, SharePoint Online, any other Microsoft 365 service is all driven right by these tokens. So yeah, and if we actually just walk through a sort of demonstration here, let me just get out of pen mode. Right, so this I recorded. This is using software that you see on the right here. That's an attacker view, and this is EvilGenix. It's a easy to obtain, relatively easy to learn and use phishing software, right? So this isn't the thing that's like going to send an email trying to phish people, but this is the thing that intercepts the authentication, right? So this is like when you're clicking on that link, ultimately like a thing, right, that your end user that's being phished may land on. Right on the left, we just have our user, right? So sort of fast forwarding here where we're already saying, right, like the user's clicked on that malicious link, and we can see, right, that this obviously is not the URL to sign into Microsoft services.
Yeah, but you have to look twice though to see it though. That's the thing.
Yeah, yeah.
It looks like, it's like a lot of things look pretty realistic here to me.
Yeah. So right, and you go to sign in. Just go in here. So right, again, signing in, you wouldn't know if you were looking at this aside from the URL that this is anything malicious going on.
Yep. That's one of the reasons why we customized our backdrop for the login page.
Yeah. Okay. So, and this is where they get, though, this is where they'll get you, is if you look at the screen here, right, you see that I have a custom backdrop and everything. So most modern proxies like EvilGenix here for phishing, right, they're actually scraping like the actual login page and re-forwarding all of it. So
I spoke too soon now. Okay. Yeah. Okay, but let's just look at this though.
Yeah.
If we're logging in, I'll get my authentication app and I'll realize it hasn't popped up.
Yeah.
Okay, but I've already entered my ID and password into this already though. So they've got that at least.
Right, but ultimately, like this will cause. So if you're using, the push notifications, you'll still get the push notification, and I can sort of show you a picture of why you'll still get the push. But in this example I have, this is actually doing passwordless push notifications. So, right, I only had to enter in my username. I didn't even enter in a password here. But so if I had my phone to sort of show right now, you would see, right, getting the push notification, and now I have to do number matching here, right? So I type in the number on my phone, and you get that, hey, you're signed in, right? Stay signed in piece of things. And right, if we look over here, right, in EvilGenix, we actually see here that we have all authorization tokens intercepted, and that's language for this phishing software saying we have everything we need to sign into Office 365, right? But again, on the left, you would have no idea, again, aside from the URL, right, that you are not.
Okay. So
yeah.
This app pushed a message or an action to my authentication phone, to my Microsoft Authenticator app on my phone. Is that correct?
So it did not push the message. What happens is in like a phone sign-in, when you get a push notification, the thing is in this step 6 that I have here, these pushes are out of band, right? So when it is time to perform MFA and it's push-based, Entra still is the thing that's directly contacting your phone, sort of like out of band from the interaction with the website. So it's still basically, right, because it's a proxy server. It's right. Entra thinks it's talking to you, right? It doesn't know that there's this thing in the middle. So every interaction you would have with Entra, right, it's still going to do. So the point where it's like, okay, I need to send Peter a push notification, it's still going to do because it doesn't know that there's this thing in the middle that's intercepting traffic. So,
all right. So okay, so so they've got all the tokens now. With that though, how are they going to log in? Because for them to log in, they're going to need to have the authentication app on the phone, aren't they?
Well, so that is where I'll try not to get in the weeds with it, but your tokens will say that, hey, but you just performed MFA, right? Because we sort of saw on this demonstration that the Nestor Wilk had performed MFA. And so if we actually come up to, you know, the way video works here, what I wanted to show you was, okay, get it to work over here. So on the screen, and I'll try not to pause it, this cookies on the right is effectively your access token. And so what we're seeing now is the attacker replay tokens to Office 365 here. So, right, the sign-in page, we're going to go clear all of our existing browser cookies. And that cookie that we saw in EvilGenix that represents our authentication, we're just going to copy this. It's just JSON. And we're going to go drop it back into our web browser here. And so now we have the cookies for Nestor in this authentication scenario, and we just hit refresh, and we're just in, right? So this is the other part of phishing, the sort of, once I've got your credentials, I can replay them to, you know, Exchange, Office 365, things like that. So, and right, with identity protection, like, so if you have E5 or P2, identity protection will eventually pick up on that you've been phished, right? Because there's algorithms in there to determine, like, hey, right, we've seen odd behavior and, like, right, your tokens being replayed. But unfortunately, right now, it's not real time. So, right, in some ways, depending on how aggressive the threat actor might be or what they're looking to accomplish, right, they may still have several hours that they can be in your email before, right, Entra identity protections, like, raising the flag that you've been phished. So
yeah, because we get notified. Oh, hang on a minute. You've just logged in from another location. Okay, that's how. Okay, now that will be notified. Now, even though we have an office in India, so there is like 24 hours. Nobody's looking at eyes on glass, seeing all this coming up.
Yeah. And even like in some cases, right, depending on how organizations deploy identity protection, you can set your users up to self-remediate. So if your user potentially is compromised, and then the user we've said let the user self-remediate. Some organizations will kind of take a laid back stance. They'll be like, well, the user self-remediated, right? And they're not thinking like, hey, we've still had a security incident where someone's been compromised. We still should investigate, right? And sort of see what activities happened in their account at that time, right? So.
Yep. Okay.
So, but right, the answer here really is that, right, Microsoft does have a solution for this. And ultimately, while there's a lot of mail protection, it's that we really want to see the uptake on phishing-resistant authentication here, right? And so that's Hello for Business, FIDO2 security keys, Passkeys, which are now, becoming a thing that will exist in Entra. And it's called phishing-resistant because effectively there's a couple things that play here that make it impossible to intercept this type of authentication. So, one piece of it is because it is asymmetric key pairs here, right? So without, again, getting too deep into cryptography and all that sort of stuff, with a lot of ways that we perform multi-factor, right? This is shared secret. So you type in that one-time passcode, but it's a known thing that can just be replayed to Entra ID. With asymmetric cryptography, right, you have a private key on your device that effectively is used to sign an authentication request, and this, right, proxy in the middle, this attacker in the middle system would not have access to that private key, right? So it can't sign the request. One of the questions that comes up, though, is people say, well, hey, right, if it's relaying all the traffic, why doesn't it just forward the request to you? You sign it with your private key, and then it just forwards that signed response on, right? Because it's in the middle, it can do anything. And it's actually kind of funny how simple it is that there's a feature in browsers, right? So if we have a modern phishing attack against Passkeys or Hello for Business or FIDO2, right, the user still goes through this flow, but they select to use like a passkey here. And most phishing systems will still try to forward this stuff on, right? So we're still kind of go through the same flow where it's going to attempt to do things, but we actually have to thank our browsers for this thing called a origin check, right? And so when you say register Hello for Business or a FIDO2 key or a passkey with Entra, along with the public sort of side of the certificate, right, that's stored out there, there's also metadata, and there's also metadata, right, stored on your device. So your private key will say, hey, right, this is for login.microsoftonline.com, right? And when your browser sees that request coming in from a malicious proxy server that's trying to phish you, and it's like, oh, well, right, you're coming in from login.phish.entra.ms, and that does not equal login.microsoftonline.com. So I'm just going to completely disregard the request. So, this combination of asymmetric cryptography with checks within browsers, which it's in with all the browsers now, it's very common to have this origin check within, will prevent you from being phished, right? So even if mail systems don't catch, right, how you're phished, or you click on a link in a text or whatever it is, ultimately, if it's phishing-resistant authentication, and that's why I'm getting on my soapbox about it, that there's these mechanisms, right? It's like the backstop to make sure that threat actor won't be able to get those tokens necessary to impersonate you. So
right. Okay, so I totally get what you're doing here now. Not that this is a sales pitch for your company, but your company has a whole boatload of fortified products, which adds value to which defends companies. So what are your products doing that further defends the companies?
Yeah. So I mean, honestly, the phishing piece of things is just because I'm like a nerd about phishing resistant auth. We don't offer anything specific to this, but with like Entra ID or Active Directory, right? Like we in particular would say we have like a security assessment component to a couple of our products. One of them is Directory Services Protector. We also have a free product, Purple Knight, that will go run a security assessment against your Entra ID, your Active Directory, and in it, right, it will say like, hey, like we see that you're using weak forms of MFA, or you should have phishing resistant auth enabled for like your global administrators and things like this. So that's kind of where there's like I'd say the overlap in what we do, I'd say to like this demo or whatnot, but.
Right. Okay, very cool. All right, we're almost up on the hour. I have to say thank you for this. Someone's asking about where they can find you on Twitter. I just in the chat here. I got you on Twitter and on LinkedIn as well. Where are you learning all of this? Like, where's a good source where you're getting your information from? What
So I like to follow, man. I mean, there's so many security people out there, right? And you have both InfoSec people who aren't in the Microsoft ecosystem, as well as there's like Dr. Nestori and Kirk Jan and Rue Campbell. I would say if people are curious, I've been wanting to actually blog about like who I follow and stuff. So, right, you've got Eric on Identity is kind of my name out there for both LinkedIn and Twitter and all that. And perhaps I can use this as a catalyst to help others see where I kind of source my intel from.
Are you going to the MVP Summit next month?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I am. Yeah, are you?
Okay. I am indeed. So I'm actually doing a book signing there, actually.
Oh, nice.
On that, so we can have a conversation, have a cup of coffee there. All right, Eric, thank you for your time. And this has been very educational and entertaining, and it's good chatting, as ever.
Yeah, absolutely,
All right.
Peter.
All right, enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.